Nijisanji versus Dokibird. This is a huge scandal that has been brewing over the past week, and many people have been deeply involved in this and are deeply concerned about this. But others are wildly confused. They're seeing videos everywhere, and they're really not understanding what is going on. If you're one of those confused people, well, this is the video for you. This is 101 on the Nijisanji versus Dokibird crisis, as well as a basics of VTubing. Of course, this is The Legal Mindset. So, to begin, we've got to explain VTubing. It's very understandable that many out there have no clue what VTubing is. In fact, they may not even know that that acronym stands for, well, virtual YouTuber, virtual YouTubing. And this is exactly what we're talking about today. Now, just because we use the term YouTube in that phrase doesn't mean the streaming necessarily has to be on YouTube. It could be on other platforms like Facebook, Twitch, or even foreign platforms like Bilibili. But the important thing is that these are just not normal streamers. They're not like me or all the other lawyers or anyone out there, PewDiePie or whoever else is streaming. No. These folks are streaming as an avatar. Now, the avatar might be 2D or 3D, but generally it is anime-ish or at least anime-inspired. And for those that are really out of the loop, anime, of course, referencing Japanese animation. So it's in a way that might be similar to what you might see in an anime like Cowboy Bebop or like Akira or like Miyazaki, right? Anything that you may be familiar with that's anime-related. Now, some of them are more detailed and realistic. Some of them are more whimsical. Some of them involve actual human figures. Some are part animal. But the point is they're in a style which is typically associated with Japan because, well, this craze is associated with Japanese media. And for those that have followed my channel, and certainly those that have followed Hollywood, we know that Western media is declining, and it is declining hard. People are running from the West because we're producing absolutely nothing good these days. As we've watched on my channel closely with the decline of Disney, we've seen that they're really not putting out things people want. And people aren't just going to wait around and take the scraps off the table from the West and just not be entertained. They're looking elsewhere. And people have long looked to anime. In fact, I've loved anime for decades now. But VTubing takes anime to the next level. You not only get your avatar there, your anime avatar, but that is captured through typically some sort of motion capture or camera linked software where the avatar can actually move around, can at least emote, right? And actually look like an expressive person. So when they're talking, saying something, or responding, well, they're interacting there. They're looking like they're talking. It's almost like a real person. And beyond that, they're interacting with the chat. So you can be in a live chat at the same time, and you can interact with the VTuber. And this way, VTubing is far more interactive than any other form of media. So whether it's a movie or a TV show, I mean, we saw things like Bandersnatch attempt by Black Mirror, which was a smidge more interactive, but that is light years behind where we're at with VTubing, where you have almost an instant response. You can actually plug into the system via a chat, and you can get almost an instant response from the YouTuber or VTuber themselves. So this is something that is absolutely different from other forms of media and really represents a radical transformation of the industry. Now, typically, what are VTubers doing? Well, they might be watching anime, playing games. They might be just doing their own thing, maybe karaoke. Maybe they're doing some sort of contest. They might just be chatting, just talking to their audience. Might be ranting about an issue. Might be going through some photos or reviewing another person's video. There's a lot of different things that a VTuber might be doing at any given time. And because of that, because their content can be so varied, there's various niches. There's people that are great singers. There's people that are great gamers. There's people that are great at specific games. And there's people that maybe love a specific type of animation. Maybe they have some other sort of skill. Maybe they're great at drawing. They have all these different skills and niches. And even within the VTubing community, there's now people that report on VTubing. It's become such a big space that there's room for people to cover the news, to cover issues. And certainly for a long time, at least until I stepped around, there really wasn't anybody talking about legal issues, which is where I came in. Now, when we look at the space as a whole, what is going on with VTubing? Well, VTubing is an area where it's experienced exponential growth. The market, and even if you just look at Japan, has grown almost 450% over the past 4 years, and it's expected, even in a conservative sense, to grow around 35 to 40% at minimum worldwide. If you look at the growth of other industries or companies, this is far outpacing. Now, of course, this is not financial advice, but we've seen this from the explosive growth historically, and as it spreads outside of Japan, as it spreads into other languages other than Japanese, we're seeing it become more and more popular, which is a key point in understanding VTubing. This is something that was originally aimed solely at the Japanese market. It was really targeted at Japan. But just like anime started in Japan, that's not where it's ended. It has spread all over the world, and now there are plenty of people, particularly speaking the English language, that are huge fans of anime and huge fans of VTubers and are absolutely committed to these specific roles. One big thing that's very important to understand about VTuber culture is that the person behind the camera is anonymous. This is an identity that they typically keep to themselves. Now, there are some of them that later on and throughout time, maybe after they quote unquote graduate, which is their word for going on in a positive light, or rather maybe they're terminated, they might eventually reveal their identity. But that is of course on them to do that. Also within VTuber culture, an important concept is the past life. And this is something that I've learned over the last week, which is when a character has another avatar they've played, so let's say they had an avatar they played with one company and they move on to another, well, they typically don't reference back unless they very specifically make the choice to do so. And if they make the choice to do so, yes, then they can go ahead and proceed. But typically they do not make the choice to do so in most instances. So therefore, this is a very important element of VTubing culture, that they remain absolutely anonymous. Remember this as we go on and talk more about VTubing. So let's get to the conflict. Selene Tatsuki worked very efficiently and effectively for Nijisanji for quite a while. In fact, she was there long enough to win significant awards, win streamer awards for her gaming prowess, as she proved herself to be an invaluable asset to Nijisanji and absolutely one of the most popular streamers on their company or with their company. However, this all came to a head when Selene Tatsuki planned to make her music video Last Cup of Coffee. Now, this is a process that without a doubt went on over for a year. So this is something that would have had permissions going back and forth that Nijisanji knew about. Storyboards would have had to been approved. Other things as they went would have been approved. And the planned release was on Christmas, was a Christmas release for this music video. And her supporters had donated quite a bit of money to this. And one important thing about this is that Selene Tatsuki had repeatedly paid and had a habit of paying for her own projects. She did that over and over and over again. Many times she would request payment for Nijisanji, and they would either not pay, take too long, or have issues, so she would just pay out of her own pocket. She'd be waiting and waiting and waiting for Nijisanji and say, you know what, this is too long, I'm just gonna pay. And she ended up paying out of her own pocket for projects. Therefore, because this was something that she did this as well for the music video. And she was heavily invested in this music video to a significant degree. In fact, the music video itself was about $15,000, and all of her donations compounded were about the 200,000 Canadian dollar range. Now, when she submitted this on the 24th to Nijisanji, as she's required to do by contract, because before you post anything, you're required to get permission from the management. They came back saying, well, the song is kind of okay, but we have some IP concerns. We have some concerns on our side, so we're gonna need to look into this. Well, the funny thing is that all of the quote-unquote IP that would need to be examined was, well, Nijisanji IP. It was IP owned by Nijisanji, so they really didn't have a reason to deny that beyond a just cursory glance or just checking in their files really quick and updating it. But they managed to hold that up, not just for a day, but for even longer, for about 32 to 40 hours, where they did not approve it at all. But after that period of time, Selene Tatsuki, of her own accord, posted the video, Last Cup of Coffee. Now, management saw this and immediately privated the video. They went out there and they privated the video, which means they made it not available to the public, and they queried Selene as to what she was doing. Well, this was an absolute crushing thing for Selene Tatsuki. She pleaded with management to get the approvals to release the video, to make this thing public that so many people had paid for, but that was not to happen. Instead, they were to scold her, to come after her, and demand that she not only apologize, but issue a public statement on it, and kind of walk that back. Well, this was all a lot for Celine Tatsuki, and unfortunately, following this incident, there was an attempt that was made on herself, right? And so that self-harm led to a hospitalization, and that was something that happened over the period after Last Cup of Coffee. Now, this is something that was known by Nijisanji. They got in contact with her emergency contact after she wasn't responding, and they got back to her that she was in the hospital. So what Nijisanji decided to do was hop onto her account and make a post. Now, this is something that is often referred to in the VTubing community as skinwalking, because they have the access to the account, and so they can go in and they can post something in your name. There was a big kerfuffle over an apostrophe because American or Canadian apostrophes, North American apostrophes are one certain type of style, and Japanese apostrophes are another certain type of style. But apostrophe gate aside, people suspected this was not Selen. This was not the actual person behind the camera. This was in fact management. And this was eventually confirmed. And long story short, after much back and forth, pointing fingers behind the scenes, there was a letter sent to Nijisanji by the lawyer for Celine Tatsuki. So Celine Tatsuki had obtained a lawyer not only because of the situation which led to self-harm, but also because there were allegations of harassment. Now, these allegations of harassment, which have been detailed very closely by Selen, were contained within a detailed document submitted to her lawyer. And this also included her medical records and her hospital visit. So this information that was submitted to the lawyer was supposed to be just for her lawyer. But her lawyer said, hey, Selen, we should, since we haven't heard from the other side, we haven't heard from Nijisanji, we want to try to get some remedy here. We want to see if we can get our costs back, get what you spent back, try to recover here. Let's send the letter to Nijisanji. Well, as soon as they sent that letter over, Nijisanji responded by immediately terminating her contract. They posted a termination notice, a very, very detailed termination notice on the web. Now, I know for those that are normies, for those that are out there in the non-VTuber space, this may seem extreme. And even for me, when I first reviewed this, I had a crazy reaction to this. I was like, what? What are you talking about? This should not be standard. And I still stand by that. I think it's a very odd and weird industry standard. However, there are case precedent, there are incidences where Japanese companies have done this in the past. They have gone out and posted the termination notice publicly on their Twitter page, on their X page. And this is what they did in this case. And it had many, many different reasons for terminating Celine Tatsuki, including ones that came up that were not alleged or not talked about before. One that was specific and was specifically problematic was they said that the letter, the information that was sent by Selen's lawyer to Nijisanji actually contained threats of, or rather accusations of harassment by livers. So saying that the other VTubers were responsible for harassing Dokibird, or rather Celine Tatsuki. Now, in this case, this is very, very interesting because it creates a situation in which other streamers, other VTubers are brought into this case. Imagine this is something that, really could have just been between employer and employee, but now we've got other parties involved. Now it's become a complicated situation. Now the facts have become much, much, much more murky. So you've got other members of Nijisanji that are now vaguely implicated. Well, let's continue forward, and we now are getting statements from Nijisanji. In particular, the most important was one that was a YouTube video from the Alira channel. Alira is a particular VTuber with Nijisanji called A Message from Nijisanji EN. In this message, Alira, name of the streamer, of course, not their personal name, their avatar name, Vox and Ike, two other streamers, came on and all claimed they were friends with Celine Tatsuki, but claimed that she had actually done many, many things wrong for a long time. She'd been violating policies, that she was the one in the wrong, that she was the one threatening, and that they were her friends, and these accusations against the company are absolutely not true. And mind you, in this statement, they said they were speaking on behalf of Selentowski. Now, one of the most important things about this is that one of the streamers in particular, although this was insinuated by the other two streamers, but one in particular, Vox Akama, stated that he thoroughly reviewed all of the documents sent over by Selen's lawyer. Well, when Selen's lawyer sent those over, they were sent with instruction from Selen that these be confidential, that these be just between legal staff, which of course brings us to our first coverage of the legal issues. So let's talk about the legal issues because first of all, they're really complex. Of course, this involves parties which are not in the jurisdiction which I practice. I'm an American lawyer. This is law that involves Japanese law or Canadian law, which is where Selentowski, now Dokibird, resides. So this is something that doesn't involve this. But, based on a just professional look at this, reading at this, not as a Japanese lawyer, Canadian lawyer, but just as an educated person, a professional looking at this law, there's some things that jump out to you as, wow, this is a potential issue and it needs to be looked into. It needs to be investigated. So this is where we have some issues. Now, the first issue we have is confidentiality. Those documents were sent from lawyer to lawyer with an anticipation of confidentiality, at least on Selen's side. However, it appears this was violated, that this information was spread out to other folks, particularly Vox Akama, who stated that he saw those documents, he saw the entirety of the documents, which would allegedly also include potential hospital information, potential private information, whether under the laws of Canada or Japan. It seems like the information that might have been put out would have been potentially private. Therefore, that raises an issue. Also, there's allegations going both ways of breach of contract. Of course, Nijisanji is throwing out breach of contract against Selentowski / Dokibird. Dokibird's throwing back mismanagement, abuse, a system that was preferential, right? So that other streamers were preferred over others. Also implicated into this is potential hostile work environment conditions that might have been created, maybe perhaps by difference in language, because a lot of the other livers at Nijisanji English spoke Japanese, whereas Selentowski Dokibird did not speak Japanese. So there's a big issue, and we've seen this in case precedent looking back at Nijisanji in previous issues, such as with Zion Lanza, that, the communication between management being in Japanese is a material fact. And whether or not you try to go to management in Japanese or not will get a different response. They're often not able to communicate effectively in English, and therefore there's a giant gap there. This need is so huge that actually right now, as of date, there are job postings for Nijisanji English for quadlingual translators. Of course, Nijisanji English is trying to pay them equivalent of $7.40 an hour US dollars in Japanese yen, of course. But they clearly have some sort of big issue managing people in the English branch. And the accusation and the suspicion, or rather the theory, which gains more and more credibility, is that other VTubers were actually effectively acting as the management of the Nijisanji English branch. So instead of Nijisanji actually paying for competent managers or people that were going to oversee, they allowed other livers to do that task. Now, why is this something that makes a little bit more sense for Nijisanji? Well, because Nijisanji's model is not quality, it is quantity. It is number of livers. It is not particularly quality of livers. They kind of spam them out there and kind of see what sticks, throw the spaghetti at the wall or maybe ramen at the wall and see what's sticking. And that kind of fits for Nijisanji because they're focused on profitability. In fact, their CEO, who gave his own statement in a weird, very Japanese way, but yet with English subtitles and in English, is one of the youngest billionaires in the world, right? And this is one of the funny things, is that they are extremely profitable. Their company has become profitable because they have taken such aggressive margins, even for certain products, taking as much as 98% of the profit of a particular merchandise, whereas they're giving only 2% to the actual talent themselves. This is just one of the examples, just one on how the relationship between Nijisanji and the livers is frayed. But now, let's talk about some of the broader issues, aside from the legal, that are implicated here. So frankly, while many people were interested in my takes on the legal issues, as neither a Canadian nor a Japanese lawyer, there are limitations to my analysis. But one thing where my analysis is spot on, particularly as an employee who worked in a Fortune 500 company, is my corporate analysis. I served as corporate counsel, so looking at communications, PR, and how that synchronizes with legal. I can look at those together and say, the sync here is off. This ratio is off. The statements they made were all bad. The statements they made were all continuing to give information that a thoughtful lawyer might chow down on. Somebody who is very litigious, somebody who has money, let's say somebody who had money like an Elon Musk level, got behind Dokibird. There are many suits that could be brought against Nijisanji. There's many things that could be filed and might stick because they continue to make statement after statement after statement, which created more and more and more issues rather than just shutting up, just shut up, and not talking, which would be in the West the typical strategy. Because in the West, we've seen litigation strategy typically in PR typically boil down to, well, this is a complicated matter, a legal matter. We really can't talk about it right now. It's ongoing. We have negotiations. But these things were playing out on Twitter. These were playing out online. And these were essentially Twitter wars between a company and its former employee, which played out in front of all of us rather than playing out, well, in private. We're just used to that in the West being something that goes on in private. So clearly there's big PR and communication issues in how to deal with this. And frankly, there's also some big miscommunication issues between Japan and English, between Japanese and English, and frankly also between Japanese culture and North American culture, Canadian American, etc., in terms of our expectations for what a company is supposed to do. And certainly this has also exposed a massive issue with the litigation or even arbitration of these issues, because we've got a cross-border issue. It's not really efficient or effective for either party to sue the other in either jurisdiction. So as I analyzed, it's not really effective for Nijisanji to sue Dokibird in Japan. She doesn't live in Japan. She doesn't really have assets there. And then to go and sue her in Canada, there's some barriers over there. And for Dokibird to go over to Japan to sue, or even to sue in Canada, there are the same exact barriers. And also for Celine Tatsuki, Dokibird, there would be issues financially, emotionally. This would be taxing. This would be long. And for somebody that has struggled particularly with attempts at self-harm, there were 2 major attempts that were involved here. This is something that we wouldn't want to happen. And in fact, in the interim, since this has gone on, Dokibird, and reverting to original personalities, Dokibird has gone back to streaming and has also opened up a fundraiser which has raised tens of thousands of dollars for mental health. So we've seen the positive that can come out of this. So let's get to the conclusion. My conclusion, the overall conclusion here, is that there is much growth that is needed in the VTuber industry. There is scrutiny that needs to be placed on companies, particularly big companies that find themselves subjecting workers across the seas to conditions that would not be acceptable in their home country. If these were all Japanese workers, this would be different, right? They'd be able to easily avail themselves of Japanese labor law. They might more easily communicate with their lawyers. They would understand the expectations. They'd have the cultural frame of reference. The idol industry is something very, very specific to Japan. Different countries deal with their idols and their celebrities differently. They're not the same in Japan as they are in America, for example. And this is something that is a problem for global talent. They just don't understand the Japanese frame of reference and Japanese work culture. And this is a big conflict between the two, because VTubers in America are not, and English VTubers are not one-for-one copies of Japanese VTubers. They're catering to a different market. You might see the same waifus and the same aesthetics, but that doesn't mean they're absolutely the same. In fact, they are quite different. So because of that, we need some mechanism for effectively dealing with these cross-border issues. And there are 2 main things I can think of that would help with this. Number 1 is some sort of arbitration regime, some sort of neutral arbiter that could be looked to as fair and referenced to by the industry that could say, hey, we're going to go to this arbiter to resolve these. We're going to go to this panel of experts who's going to look at this, and we're all going to agree, the talent, the company, to go to arbitration rather than litigation for these issues. I think that's something that could be quite powerful in this scenario, particularly if it's in a neutral location that is outside of Japan. So for example, if the Japanese companies had an American arbitrator or a European arbitrator, or even another Asian country like Korea or Thailand or somewhere else that was viewed as neutral in this, it could be more effective. The other thing that's going to come up, and the other solution, is there need to be more companies in people's home countries. So people need to look at their companies in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, wherever else they are, as more of a solution than the Japanese companies. There's no need for them to go to a Japanese company. Now, the Japanese companies are the most well-known, they've been the most successful, they have the most reputation, but by necessity, everything could be done by outside outside companies, could be done by other companies. In fact, other companies are popping up around the globe, including the quite interesting Phase Connect in Canada. But that being said, you don't need to go to Japan, and Japanese law is looking increasingly problematic in offering an appropriate remedy for our overseas, particularly English-speaking streamers. So I think we're going to see more of them that are in the English-speaking sphere deviate away from going with Japanese companies and going with international companies, companies that speak the same language as them, have the same sort of work expectations, have the same sort of communication over recompensation, and don't need a middleman to translate. That is a big barrier that is absolutely room for abuse. It's room for a power funnel where those folks can kind of take control and change things. And we've seen this in industries like anime itself, where the localizers have this power because they are the funnel. They're the ones that are translating it, and therefore they can put, well, questionable messages in things as it goes through this funnel. I think this is a giant PR mess. This is a communications mess. There are certainly legal issues implicated, even though my conclusion is there will not be litigation from this. And in fact, if anything, there will be a settlement, there will be NDAs signed, and this will go away, if not just both parties staying silent and doing their own thing. Either way, this is something that creates issues when you have the appearance that companies in Japan are violating labor law, are violating basic international norms, are violating potentially international privacy standards. These are serious concerns. These are not things that people should joke at or laugh at. Just because it's a waifu doesn't mean they don't have rights. There is a person behind that avatar. There's an individual there who is actually harmed. And the industry needs to take a consideration for that person, for that individual and their thoughts. Not just looking at the IP, not just caring at the avatar as their IP, but also caring at the person behind the avatar and understanding that just because they can get away with more based on this international status does not mean they should. Hopefully this has explained everything very, very clearly for you and helped this come to light for you. Of course, this is a very deep rabbit hole which I have gone down, and I have summarized. I have left out many details. In fact, I've even left out important details. But hopefully for those that are normies or newbies or never heard about this before, this is something you can understand better and you can engage with. Please let me know in the comments if you feel like I did a good job of summarizing this, if you understand this better. If there's anything else you might add to this, please leave that in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this, please leave a like on the video.